I have a problem with this saw right here. As you all know, I'd moved all of my battery platform tools over to Milwaukee in the attempts to try and get on the same battery platform. One of the last remaining tools for me to move over was the track saw. Originally, my very first track saw was a DeWalt one. I've also used a Makita one, never owned it, but I have used it. Also, I have the Festool one. Now, overall, I've been really happy with the Festool one, but in the aid of trying to get onto the same battery platform, I thought I'd give the Milwaukee one a go. Unfortunately, my personal experience with the Milwaukee one has been quite poor. And while I do think that Festool is known for being quite an expensive brand, I do think that the Festool one, comparing it to the Makita, the DeWalt, the Milwaukee, and many other track saws, it's actually very well priced. Now, my main issues with the Milwaukee track saw is not down to power. The power is absolutely fine. No issues with power whatsoever. If you use a normal battery or a high output battery, you are going to be happy with the power output of this saw. And I actually do think that Milwaukee did come out with some really good features. For example, over here, you do have the scoring function, which allows you to plunge the blade 1mm into the material, scoring things like veneers and laminates so that it reduces the chip out. Something that I wish that the Festool did have. I also know that the DeWalt one doesn't have that, and on some Makitas it does have that. Now, there is one thing, and one thing only, that stops me using this saw permanently. Now, there are a few other things about this saw which are not only inconvenient, but also reduce the actual usability of this saw. The first thing would be blade changes, although it is relatively easy to drop the saw down and lock it in place. Trying to pull out this Allen key, you need another tool to pull this thing out. It is very difficult to pull out, and they've done that obviously so that you don't lose the Allen key. However, on various other models of track saws, it isn't an issue. Milwaukee could have really done with making this much easier to access. And while we're on the subject of blade changing, to actually change the blade, you have a button here to stop the blade rotating while you undo the blade. Whereas on the Festool, you'd lift this up, it plunges down, and everything locks in place. You do not need to stop the arbor by pressing another button. The arbor stops itself from rotating, and it is a very nice, convenient way of changing the blade. Again, that isn't really a deal breaker for me. I've done this with other track saws, the Makita and the DeWalt, where you have to press a button in to stop the blade from rotating. So again, it's more of a convenience thing, and I know that Milwaukee did spend a lot of time and research on this saw before they actually brought it out to market, and a lot of people were asking for this to be brought to market from Milwaukee. So it's just a bit of a shame that they didn't think of that beforehand, or at least implement this into the saw. Speaking of implementing features into the saw, there is no wireless dust collection. You have to purchase an add-on, which I understand with the likes of Makita, you can do that, and DeWalt as well. You also have to buy an additional tool. However, with the Bluetooth batteries from Festool, they will automatically turn on the Festool dust extractor. Again, this is more of a convenience thing and not a complete deal breaker, but it would have been nice, as this is the newest major track saw out on the market. The next issue that I have with this track saw is these guide rails on the bottom. Now, comparing it to the Festool one, the Milwaukee ones are slightly further apart, which means that in theory, you would get a more accurate and straight line cut, but overall that doesn't really make too much difference. But where it does cause an issue is, for example, if your track is ever so slightly too short, sometimes you may end up hanging your track saw over the end of the track, and the Festool one does an absolutely fantastic job of staying in a straight line. Whereas the Milwaukee one has a lot of play in it on the front and on the back. Again, I fully understand that you are asking the tool to do something that it's not really designed to do, but it's just one of those things that Festool is able to do that you are not able to do with the Milwaukee one. I am unsure if you're able to do it with the DeWalt one, and I am unsure if you're able to do it with the Makita or any other track saw for that matter, but I know that you can do it with the Festool one and you will not have issues. And finally, the last minor inconvenience between these two saws is the Milwaukee one is slightly taller, and it is also ever so slightly longer as well. Now, if those issues were the only issues that I have with this saw, I would be okay with keeping it. I wouldn't have an issue with continuing to use this saw for my professional work. I can live with the issues that this has, but there is one thing that absolutely is a deal breaker for me. Now, for the life of me, I cannot understand why, when you plunge this saw into no material whatsoever, and then you taper off into, for example, you're trying to take off 2 or 3 millimeters. Say, for example, if you're planing the top of a door off, you go from 0 millimeters all the way down to 2 millimeters. What actually happens is the blade deflects a lot. Now, I've tried a 12 amp high output battery on this saw. I've tried changing it from the original Milwaukee 1.6 millimeter curved blade up to a much thicker 2.2 millimeter curved blade, which is brand new, out of the box, perfectly sharp. I've also tried to plunge at shallower depths, but no matter what I do, I cannot seem to get this saw to stop deflecting. This means it actually has a serious effect on the quality of the cuts when you're tapering from 0 to 3 millimeters, or within that sort of range, 2-3 millimeters. It makes the cuts look very, very bad. It's causing a lot of wear and tear on the tool itself. It's causing a lot of wear and tear on the blade, on the batteries. And it's just something I've never had an issue with using the Festool one, even using their thin curved blades, even when the blade is blunt, even when I'm plunging 40 mil into oak doors. I have never once had an issue with deflection on this sort of scale. Now, I did have one issue with deflection, and that was actually because I had a blunt blade and I was plunging way too far into the material, and the saw skated off of the track and actually cut into my track. But that was entirely user error. I'd love you guys to put your thoughts and your input into why you believe this may happen. If this has happened to you, if you've had no issue at all, please leave it in the comments, because I just don't get on with this saw at all. That's my opinion. I'm not saying you should not buy this saw. It is a good overall saw, but for me, it's just not something that I'm willing to take on. And it looks like me trying to stick to one battery platform, that's out of the window.